Good afternoon, Steve.
Hi, John.
I have started the live stream and we're recording as well.
Thank you.
So I think we're waiting for the auditor.
The auditor has not yet arrived.
I just spoke with the auditor and he's joining now. Marcia, I think that the auditor is as an attendee. Could you promote him to panelist, please?
He's been promoted.
Thank you.
I'm in. Good afternoon.
Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Ahmad.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, I think we can probably then start. Do you want to do a roll call?
Director Danziger
Here.
and Director Jex.
Here. Okay. Do we need to?
Yeah, we could go ahead and open for public comment.
Okay.
And we do not have any attendees and we've not received any written correspondence.
Okay. Why don't we just proceed? Just a little preamble to the agenda. And the reason I did what I did in putting it into questions, the questions that are basically in the two different categories, one which we're going to item 1, and I believe Gloria Ann, you and Mary will probably participate largely in that. The questions that are on the outline are not ones that I created or came up with. They're pretty standard questions that are typically drawn from a variety of areas where you'll find information with regards to the content of this particular meeting, which is the pre-meeting to the beginning of the audit, and are designed really to solicit information from both financial and accounting on a variety of topics as far as what is important. And then the second set of questions, of course, are for the auditor. And so why don't we just begin? And Gloria Ann, do you want to lead off? Do you want to put up?
Yes.
Questions?
Sorry about that.
Okay, so these are the questions. So why don't we just go down each one of these? Hopefully you've had a chance to look at them and review them and perhaps prepare some comments. So we'll just start off. Glorianne?
Yes, and so thank you. So yes, Mary and I prepared answers for the questions and we discussed them. So the first question regarding any major changes in operations this year. So this wasn't a change this year, but I think it's still notable under this section, which is the fact that the administration staff is all working remotely in the fiscal year.
Okay. That'll be true, I guess, with regards to even the final phase of the audit.
Yes, we plan to continue to work remotely through 2021.
Okay.
So the next question, do you want me to go on to the next question?
Sure, yeah.
All right, thank you. So the next question regarding any areas that require special attention due to high operation or financial risks. Yes, I think the area of remote work. And also there's high volume. The second thing that we identified that there were high volume of strike teams, so that should be looked at as well.
Yeah, I had that on my thing, particularly when we're dealing with last year's activity and looking at the volume we had. That area, I guess, Ahmad, is something that we think probably should have some attention given to it. Maybe this is a particularly good time to talk about the others. We've had a lot of additional grants, fortunately, and it looks like that activity level is also continuing. And whether or not we ought to add that as well as an area of focus. Glorianne, I don't know, do you have any update in terms of the success, or are there any other grant activities currently pending that might be involved in the current year?
There were several grants in 21 in the current fiscal year. None of them were, well, the federal grant was just the SAFER grant. They're primarily all state grants.
Right, but we've had a number of them that came up during the year that we had not anticipated, and then some that I think are still in the middle that maybe we might be doing later in the year or even into next year. And it seems to me, again, the issue of control and compliance associated with those grants and the collection and recovery, as well as in terms of the wildfire deployment activity, we ought to have maybe a thorough review and any recommendations that might come out of that, Ahmad. Okay.
I have a question. As far as any special attention, I was curious about the Orinda chipping program that we're going to be managing. Will that, will any, and I assume I know the answer, I'm just going to ask it anyway, any accounting related to that be separate, a whole separate new category? How does that get accounted for?
There's nothing to account for, sir. There's no, the current plan does not envision any money changing hands. So as a result of that, there's nothing to account for.
Oh, so Orinda, they pay all the bills. They do, I mean, for the chipper, how about, oh, and like the people who are going to run the equipment, that's all paid for by Orinda.
Yes, sir. We just manage the labor.
Got it. Okay.
What we're doing is some, I guess, volunteering time, administrative time. Take the two.
Sort of, sir. I mean, it's our existing system is well developed and well run. So there will be a minor administrative tax with regard to time for Gordon and Mona, who managing the requests and ensuring the crews are at the right place at the right time. But that's not something we're set up to account for their time, split time as like a lawyer would do with billing. So there won't be any dollars associated with it. There will be some time, but that's not something we're anticipating accounting for in the current environment.
Okay.
Okay,
Next question is, what are MOFD's policies and procedures to defer conflicts of interest and illegal acts, and how are they monitored? So for conflicts of interest, the district has a conflict of interest code. It requires specified positions to file an annual statement with the district clerk. The district also has a fraud policy as well for addressing fraud.
okay. Ahmad, have you looked at those?
We review, as part of the audit, we definitely do review overall policies of the district. And yes, we have always looked at the district policy, including conflict of interest. I know we review those Form 700s. Gloriana always asking for them. Other policies, including the fraud policy, definitely something that
the conflict of interest policies that we have, and I think there's an annual sign off, is there not, Glorianne, that even our outside directors are involved?
Yeah, the conflict of interest policy also applies to the elected officials, and elected officials are required to file the annual Form 700.
Okay. So in terms of review of that particular activity, is that something that you've reviewed, Ahmad, in the past?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, so we look at Form 700, and the reason that we do this, Director, is that we have to disclose related party transactions in the financial statement. So on an annual basis, we look at those Forms 700s, which they are filled out, I believe, by the directors and actually management. We look at those, and if there's anything that there, we'll come back.
great. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay,
How does MOFD minimize the risk of fraudulent financial reporting? MOFD, we have separation of duties among finance staff. All financial reporting entries are reviewed by a second staff member.
okay.
What are MOFD's revenue recognition policies? For our government-wide financial statements, they are prepared on an accrual basis of accounting. At the fund level, those are prepared on the modified accrual basis of accounting.
Okay, so when the ones that we get on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, those are predominantly not on the accrual basis, but on a cash basis?
For the quarterly financial reports, those are the ones that end up in the funds. So that would be under the modified accrual basis.
Okay. And so the only accrual activity occurs at the end of the year, fiscal year.
No, that's not true. So we have monthly accrue for ambulance revenue. We also accrue as we go for strike teams. So as soon as we get an invoice from the state, then we accrue that into revenue and accounts receivable.
Okay, so those two items and that's it?
Also, another one is weed abatement charges. When we invoice someone for weed abatement charges, then those are also accrued into accounts receivable.
Okay.
Are there any major write-downs, impairments, or other significant transactions that will affect the financial statements? No, there are not at this time.
I was thinking about that particular issue in looking at the life or remaining life on Station 41 and the administrative offices, in light of the fact that we may be replacing those shortly, hopefully. I guess in looking at that, and Chief, the memo that you sent out indicated that there's going to be an exchange of property, but no, so there'd be no anticipation of any write-off relating to those assets or shortening the life with regards to the equipment or material that is in the thing that in the facilities currently.
I think it's premature to have that discussion outside of board direction to proceed in closed session, sir.
Okay.
Were there any significant changes in accounting estimates or models? If yes, what was it? So no, there were not any significant change in accounting estimates or models.
Okay.
Is MOFD contemplating any changes in accounting methods? No, we are not.
Okay.
Should the audit committee be aware of any problems, tax, or legal difficulties? No.
Okay.
Does the management have the appropriate resources to assess the effectiveness of internal control over financial reporting? Yes, we do currently at this time. However, I will caveat that there is a lot going on right now. There's, and that I think that administrative staff, particularly finance staff, is at maximum capacity. There's negotiations, there's COVID issues, there's remote work, there's a significant number of grants. Fire prevention has a lot of contracts and payments that are flowing through finance. There's also a significant strike team activity as going on, and there's just a lot going on right now. So we are at capacity. And I think if there is any more big projects taken on, then that will need to be addressed.
Ahmad, one of the things when we were talking about earlier, things that we would like it to have you take a look at, the other issue, which was Glorianne just raised, with the amount of activity involved in contracting and contracting with outside providers of services. That's an area, I think, another area of focus that we'd like to have you take a look at and respond to any comments or recommendations relating to improving that activity or the controls associated with it.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Glorianne.
Are there policies and procedures in place for disclosing internal accounting control deficiencies and frauds or illegal acts identified to the auditors and the audit committee? The district has a fraud policy, which requires fraud to be reported to the fire chief and administrative services director. The fire chief and administrative services director report fraud to the auditor. There's no, nothing in the policy that requires reporting to the audit committee.
There's nothing in the policy that relating to reporting it to the audit committee?
Correct.
And why is that?
Because the audit committee is new. We didn't, when the fraud policy was developed, the district didn't have an audit committee.
I think that was something that should change then.
So that can be done. The policy can be updated.
Okay.
How is management reporting current with respect to changes? How is management remaining current with respect to changes in accounting and financial reporting requirements? Are there appropriate training mechanisms in place? So right now, staff is using webinars. There's a variety of webinars, including from the audit firm, as well as through the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers that we attend. So yes, I think that the training is adequate at this time.
Good.
How do you define materiality? How is it different from the auditor's determination? So I define materiality as what is significant and reasonable. I don't know how it differs from the auditor's definition. I think the auditor would need to answer that.
We have
Talk about that.
benchmarks. Yeah, so we have benchmarks. The focus is what is significant to the reader of the financial statement. So it differs from one year to the other, depending on what benchmarks or what is the focus. And because you have multiple opinion units there that are reported in the finance, each unit may have a different benchmark in terms of the focus. So sometimes it's total assets, sometimes it's meeting the budget, total revenues, total expenses, changes in fund balance, so it differs. But normally that materiality is rather low, just because we adhere to certain accounting standards. It's a smaller dollar thresholds is what we have with respect to the financial statements.
Okay.
Were there any significant systems implemented or modified that can impact processing of transactions? No, there were not in fiscal year.
Okay. Ahmad, you got your list of questions?
Yes.
I have one question here.
Sure, Steve.
I should have said this before, and I think you could probably answer it, but I wanted to know if there are any new laws or reporting requirements or anything through governmental accounting that became effective in 2021 that affected us. That, because I know in the past there have been, and I don't know if there's anything new.
There are a suite of gas fees that were issued. Considering the operations that you have in there, there's nothing that will impact the financial statement this year or even next year.
Oh.
There is one that was just recently issued that may impact you in 20. And just to add some more detail with respect to that particular gas fee is what they call it, an accounting standard that is for government. It requires reporting for 57 plans. So it was just recently issued. It requires reporting 457 plans of the financial statements if you have certain administrative responsibility. So we have to look at that trust document in there, work with management to determine whether these should be added to the financial statements or not. 457 plans are like a 401k plan. Many of these governments, they just establish them and then they have the trustee deal with them. But it may require some changes to your financial statements. We have to look at it. It's just the grand standard that was just recently issued.
Okay, and is it part of the audit that the auditor would make us aware of any of these changes? Is that typical?
Absolutely. We will discuss that with management. When the pension standards came out, they needed quite a bit of some preparation. So we will let management know that this is upcoming earlier on so that we can finalize the audit, produce the financial statements and that. GASB, the way that the board, the accounting board, the way that they will publish these statements, they give a couple of years heads up before that.
Okay.
So everybody will know that this just came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So everybody will stay up to date on what's going on. Definitely we'll work with management on prepping for that particular implementation.
Okay, thank you.
Ahmad, how about on leases?
Yes, so leases is effective in 22. They are as a lessor or a lessee. And yes, we will have to work with management on determining whether Those should be reported on the statements or not. You have debt that is equivalent. They're called capital leases, but the equivalent of that as they are reported on the financial statements. So if you have anything above and beyond, in which you are either a lessee or a lessor, some benchmarks in there, they have to be long-term, they have to be finished. But I see some copy machines being leased, that kind of stuff. Those are not significant. But we'll work with management on the implementation. That is effective not 21, but it is effective 22.
You can early adopt, can you? Can you not?
You can early adopt, yes. That definitely is central.
Okay. Okay, do you want to start on your questions?
Yes, sure. Did you discuss any major accounting and auditing issues with management prior to your retention? Your response to which were or might be considered to be a condition of your retention? Nothing related to our retention. The only reason, if there's anything significant to the 2021 financial statements, is discuss it with management early on so that they can prepare for it. In some instances, it does require some time. In some instances, you may have to hire someone to do a calculation specialist that have the specialty in doing these calculations. But at this point for 2021, there are no significant changes that will impact your financial statements, and therefore that discussion did not take.
Okay, thank you.
Planned scope of the audit, percentage of accounts receivable to be confirmed. How will you verify accounts payable? Will auditing procedures? Yes, we always implement the element of unpredictability in our procedures. That is the required standard that we put that in there. I don't know what it is, and I can't even tell you what it is because we haven't finalized the audit plan. It will be done sometime soon. Do we confirm balances, percentage of receivables to be confirmed? We confirm all material account balances. All your receivables are material are typically. If there's the only one that we do what we call subsequent receipts as to how we test them is the ambulance related receivables, and we put quite a bit of some analytical procedures on those. With respect to accounts payable, how do we verify them? We come in, I don't know, in August or September before we opine, we ask management for an updated check register. So we look at subsequent disbursements. That's the process of auditing accounts payable. And if they were paid in subsequent events, the service period belongs to the 2021 fiscal year, we will verify and ensure that these were reported on the accounts payable. Further, with respect to accounts payable, we do procedures such as look at open POs, and if there are anything in there that is outstanding, we ask the question, did you receive that invoice? And it should it get put into accounts payable? That's pretty much it for that question. I'll take a pause to see if there's any questions with respect to that bullet point.
Okay.
How can your planned scope of the audit be relied upon to detect material errors, fraud, lax, material and so this, just to confirm, the scope of the audit is to ensure that financial statements, the process is mainly confirming the balances that are reported on the financial statements. That is the ultimate goal of the audit. It is not designed to detect fraud. There are other engagements that are there that is designed to do forensic auditing, legal acts, or even material weaknesses in the internal control. However, the audit standards does tell us that if you, and we have two audit standards that we adhere to with respect to the district, one of which is the issued by the AICPA. This is the generally accepted auditing standards used by various industries out there, whether not-for-profit, whether for-profit, or whether governmental. These are auditing standards that we adhere to. Because you are a government, The GAO issues a separate set of auditing standards. They're called government auditing standards. So we adhere to two sets of auditing standards defining on the financial statements. Both standards, they require us to obtain an understanding of the internal control. They say if you're going to opine on the financial statement, you have to obtain an understanding of the internal control. So the objective of obtaining an understanding of the internal control is as it relates to the financial statements. Mainly the focus is how you process your receipts, disbursements, and payroll. Those are the three areas. Look at other areas as well: capital assets, account reconciliations, financial reporting, what the review processes are in terms of producing these financial statements. But those are the areas that we look at as they relate to the financial statements. It's not per se a fraud audit, but it is definitely something, if we are aware of, we see as part of the testing, we will report it to management. Further, government auditing standards, because you are a government, you're subject to the transparency. Every state has its own set of rules, and then the GAO issues government auditing standards. And by contracting us to do the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, we are required to communicate to the governing board instances of fraud. If we know them, we don't look for them, but if we do see them as part of the testing that we are performing, we are required to communicate instances of fraud, instances of non-compliance with the laws of regulation as well. Those are required to have to communicate those to the government. Let me go back to that question. So can you rely on my scope to detect material errors? Yes, material errors will likely be detected. We do sample. You could have an aggregation of immaterial items that in the aggregate, they may be material. That language is well specified and clarified in the audit opinion. With respect to the other items, fraud, legal acts, or even material weaknesses in the internal control, those are instances, if they are detected by us, will be communicated to you. Is the scope of the audit designed to detect fraud or illegal acts? That's not within the scope of the audit. It definitely can be something in which you can call someone to do a particular audit engagement that will be designed for the particular. As I said again, we see them, we definitely communicate them.
Okay.
Are there any concerns with how management controls key business processes, key processes identified? So I'm not sure what the key business processes, and again, the key business processes that we look at as they relate to the financial statements, financial reporting, and then receipts, disbursements, and payroll. And associated with, for example, receipts, you'll have procurement, the purchase function, and we look at segregation. So those are our major business processes. Payroll. So we look at the HR. In fact, we had a comment last year about segregation that management implemented. We look at account reconciliation, how management reconciles various account articles from the statements. Are there review processes? Journal entries is one area that we always focus on. Journal entry are effectively an easy way to perpetrate management override, what they call it. Definitely, this is something that we look at and we ask for the business for those journal entries that are reported on the financial statements. So are there any concerns? None. We have no concerns. If we see something, we will begin the process and we will be in touch with management at the governing board if we see anything.
Okay. Next one.
Are there areas where the district personnel could be of greater assistance to reduce the amount spent by you? Management has been very cooperative. Last year, the shutdown, we did the audit remotely. We already know the processes in there just because of the experience that we gained in prior years. But this year, we plan to come back. We're not going to do it at 100%, where we're going to be at the district 5 days a week during the interim and 5 days a week during the final phase, and whatever other days that will come down to the district, we're going to do something hybrid. So this is what we need from management, is an expectation to have enough space for us when we come in. We think that an audit cannot be 100% electronic. You get more information by talking to people than you would by just looking at the electronic. So likely, right now it's not 100% open, but as soon as it opens, we'll schedule something to meet with management at the district and actually speak with them and just look at the documents while we're there. It's not going to be 100% remote, but we're bringing back the actual face-to-face interaction. As soon as it opens, we haven't decided when that's going to happen.
Good.
With your risk assessment of internal control policies and procedures, enable you to use audit with the audit. The two areas that we focus, and it looks like this, there may be that we may add area. The biggest area obviously is emphasizes ROI. So payroll expenses, and while we test it, we do analytical procedures. We tie these numbers to tax findings. That's the best way to test the numbers that are reported on the financial statement. But then again, it's just a high risk area. It's just something that we always look at over time, timesheets, approvals, segregation in terms of the hiring, segregation, and even in the payroll system itself, and the HR system, it's something that we take a look at. So definitely it is something that we do. And this is a good meeting. It's always good. It's actually required by audit standards that we need with at least one board member at the beginning of the audit to just take a look at areas that are of a concern. We have to elicit that feedback. We will definitely take a look at the new grant that the district is receiving. You may be subject to federal compliance audit. I don't know yet. And then definitely the new contracts that will result as a result of those contracts. The bidding process. There's a public contract that is out there that require bidding processes and all of that. Definitely, that's something that we'll take a look at.
Okay. Next one.
Risk assessment techniques. Will you use? One of the things there is the element of unpredictability, and then just the focus of the financial statements. So we always look at who is the reader of the financial statements and who uses those financial statements. And those are the creditors, in some instances, the governing board. Ultimately, it's the taxpayers that are the users of the financial statements. And that's how we tailor it. Meeting the budget is always one of the areas that we look at being funded. There are no pressures on management. I can tell you that the district is well funded, so there's no concerns from that perspective. But again, meeting the budget, not exceeding that budget, making sure these actuals, again, we don't test the budget, but we look at it in relation to the actuals. Are these actuals properly reported? Are your expenses properly reported? And then again, payroll is always something of significance. Always. Criteria that you use to determine materiality, the benchmarks that I just spoke about. It's not always a good practice for the auditor to communicate which benchmarks we use and what the percentage is. I can tell you it's really low. And it depends on the nature of the fund. So I'm just going to give some general guidelines. Like, for example, a capital project fund is created to bank the money for a major project that will be upcoming in future years. Therefore, the emphasis there for that particular fund is total assets more than it is revenues. On the flip side of this is meeting the budget from a general fund perspective, because it processes a lot of payroll. The focus there may be expenses or revenue, depending on the year, depending on the situation, depending on the risk. These are the benchmarks that we use. Who uses this financial statement? And ultimately, obviously, it's the taxpayer. There are multiple users out there, and that's how we design material. Material is very low. We merged recently, a couple of years ago, we merged. you're a government, and it's not like earnings per share where a number, 1 cent change in earning per share is significant to the reader of the financial statement. But even with that, with the merger, our materialities had been dropped drastically to a point where you are treated basically an equivalent to a public company. How those materialities are treated are very good. That's how we determine it. Again, the benchmark is, what is the focus? Is it banking money? Is it meeting the budget? Depending on the nature of the fund, we have multiple opinion units. We don't opine on the entire entity. We opine on them on a fund by fund basis. That's the focus.
My recollection in prior years, you've not had any material past adjustments that have not been booked.
That's correct.
Okay.
Utilize computer auditing techniques to review our computer processes. We actually sent a specialist from a different office, from the technology group to the district to take a look at the internal controls. I believe they did. So the focus is segregation there. I think we had a comment, Florian, that the district implemented with respect to someone being able to add an employee, and this is system implementation more than it is paper implementation. On paper, everything, but you've got 2 signatures in there or more. You've got appropriate people approving the addition of a new employee and the payment. But then upon looking at the system, I believe we saw something in there where someone had the ability through the system, which is, I can't remember if it's ADP, I can't remember what the system was. And management went in and removed that login capability or the ability to access both modules. And again, the objective is segregation. You add an employee, you can't pay them. You got to have someone else approving the addition versus the person who pays them. I can't remember the exact detail of what happened there last year, but we communicated that to the board. Was implemented in the prior year. So we did send somebody to take a look at the computer processes. Again, and the focus is segregation. We definitely is something that we will be taking a look at in the current year. Will you use statistical sampling? Yes. We use a software called Teammate. We use it for testing journal entries, testing payroll. But software that's interesting as to how we use it. It flags out your weekend entries. It flags out your holiday entries. It asks questions. Why is there a gap in the number of journal entries or whichever? So it has the ability to do analyticals in there. It puts out the sample. We use the sampling techniques for payroll, for accounts payable. Is another area that we use it for. But mainly is if it's a big population, if you have further compliance audit that you're subjected to, there's definitely something we'll download the general ledger and we'll use computer sampling or statistical sampling in order for us to come up with that.
Okay.
Plan scope of the audit differ from the prior year. We solicit feedback from members of the board. And again, the element of unpredictability would be something likely we're going to have contracting with the grants in the current year. And then we don't know yet. It's something that we will do brainstorming as a team. The 3 of us are involved in the audit based on the knowledge that we acquired in the prior year, based on the changes that are happening in the district. Pretty sure COVID has a significant impact on your operations. We'll come up with something. Likely right now, there's going to be a focus on contracting and procurement. Payroll is always of ultimate risk. Is something that we always focus on. It is, I can't remember, 80–90% of your expenses. I'll take a look at with the related benefits as well. So likely the change is going to be mainly related to those grants and contracts. Something that we solicit feedback from the board similar to this meeting. We'll also sit with management, see what changes are happening at the district, and come up with an element of unpredictability for the current that is a little bit different than the prior. Again, material account balances will always be.
Okay,
Staffing on the engagement is the same manager. He's been on the engagement for 3 years. I do have a senior that also has been on the engagement for 3 years. Both of them are currently working with management. I believe, Florian, they just sent you these PBCs are prepared by clients, the request for document. I know you guys are setting up a portal to upload the documents and all that. So the manager has been on the job for about 3 years. He's been with us for about 10 years. All he does is cover audits. And senior is also the same. 4 years, 3 years. Those are the engagement team members are.
the quality review at the end, my recollection, someone from outside your office did that. Is that correct? Is that, or is that going to be done in your office this year?
This year we'll likely come back to the office. We merged last year. Well, we merged in 19, but in 2020, all reports, all financial statements, and then certain documents with binders were ran through, they call it NAO, National Assurance Office. So your reports were QC, quality control review, by someone in the Minneapolis office of our firm. Your report specifically was actually reviewed by someone from an outside. That's correct. There were really no changes. This is an award-winning CAFR. It's not just NAO that reviews it on our side, but it's also the GFOA that reviews it. District has been receiving the award. I'm pretty sure by now they haven't received it. They will receive it. So this is the review process, but it is coming back to the office. We have quite a bit of some experience doing these types of audits. But from a due diligence perspective, as a result of the merger, your 2020 CAFR go through NAO, there were no significant comments.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you plan to detect the existence of related parties? That two or three procedures that we do, 4 procedures. Inquiry of management, we look at Form 700s. We always request those from management. We look at the board minutes, we read your board minutes all the way through the date, the issuance of the financial statement. And then, we test all kinds of payments, all kinds of receipts at the district. See something in there that looks familiar, we come back and ask a question. That's how we detect related parties. It is a required disclosure, and we have audit procedures that are designed that are required and designed to detect related party transactions because they are a required disclosure on the financial statement. So definitely it is something that we do. Ultimately, it's review of journal entries, Form 700s, inquiries of management, and then just reviewing your governing board, the governing board's minutes. That's how we do it, and reviewing the payments that are happening throughout the year. It's on a sample basis. It's not, we're not testing 100% of the population, but if we do detect it, and the fact that we're out there looking at that stuff, added control of it. Are there any proposed auditing, accounting, statutory or GASB reporting rules that could materially impact the financial statements? Leases, as you mentioned, Director, in the upcoming year, may be something that impact your financial statements. And again, it's not, we already have numbers related to those fire engines, fire qual. We treated those somehow as debt more than this a capital lease. So these are reported on your financial statements. If you're leasing buildings as a lessee or lessor, something that we will have to evaluate as to whether they should be reported on the financial statements. The way that this GASB works is that it puts an asset and a liability financial statement. So it doesn't impact your equity, but it's an added transparency to the reader of the financial statements that, hey, we've got these long-term people that we're committed to, and they are right there on the face of the financial statement. So that's upcoming. in 2022. I don't know how significant that's going to be to the district. 3 years down the road, I think it's in 2023, that it's that GASB 97, which we have to look at your level of responsibility with respect to 457 plan, even 403 plans, 403B plans, if you have any of those. And again, it may be something that will impact your financial statements. As a rule of thumb, you may not be exercising administrative responsibilities, but if you do have that trust document is with the trustee, whoever it is, Vanguard, Standard, whoever that is, something that was probably signed off a while back ago. If you have the authority to change it in a significant manner, it may be something that should be added to your financial statement. It will not dilute the current presentation. The current presentation with it on the focus of the general fund. That general fund is your main operating fund. Other funds are basically there for special purposes, either capital project or whatever. Those set of funds will remain the same. They're not going to change. Not even the total will change. But there'll be few more pages that will be added to your financial statement that would disclose your fiduciary responsibility related to the fund. We still have 2 more years to go. I think the biggest difficulty in that would be to obtain the plan documents. A lot of these plans are very old. They've been there for a while. We'll work with management. We have common practices that we see with other cities, other special districts. We'll share that with management and we'll let you know what we need to do in order for us to put this or even not exclude it on the financial.
Glorianne, we don't have anything like that, do we?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay.
Good. Unresolved questions from the prior director. Are there any resolved questions from the prior year audit? No. Just wondering, did we receive the DFOA award, Glorianne?
No, not yet. I haven't heard from them yet.
They normally release them in May or June, sometimes in July, a little bit before we begin working on CAFR for the 2020 year. And then do you anticipate any special problems in this year's audit? We don't anticipate any problems this year's audit, even with a remote audit last year, it went very well. And again, we're coming back. We're not going to come back for a whole week, but we have to come back. It's just the nature of the audit. So that's what the plan is. We split the audit into an interim and a final, and then obviously the planning phase before we begin. Unlikely it's going to be in the interim, but likely it's going to be in the final phase of the audit. We may come for a day just for face-to-face interaction. We think auditing face-to-face to some extent is necessary.
What's the actual schedule look like in terms of when we would have draft financial information?
Similar to last year, Sarah is the holdback. There's a few numbers that requires a specialist to calculate them. Those are external parties. I think last year the audit committee members had about a month to review these financial statements. So we'll just adhere to that schedule. I can't recall what it is. I think that was adopted, Glorianne, in December, or was it November when adopted it by the board? That's around, I would say, mid-October. We received the first draft. Again, the holdback is Sarah. Sarah publishes September, mid-September. So as soon as we will adjust the financial statement, then the audit draft before we opine on it, and then upon approval we'll find out.
I think the report was eventually issued in December.
Yes, in December last year.
Is there any reason that we would want to try and accelerate it earlier?
It's standard. Your deadline is December 31st for GFOA purposes. Um, so that's the deadline for finding on the financial statements. Some agencies, they adopt them by the board before they are sent to GFOA. Some agencies actually sends them to GFOA, and then let the governing board adopt them after. District has the first practice, which is to adopt them before sending them to GFOA. So ultimately, your deadline is December 31st. The process of producing the financial statements, as many have seen in the past, it's a build-up process. You start out with the draft, and then it goes back and forth. Upon finalizing the draft, there's the management discussion and analysis. It's dependent on those final numbers. There's few sections in the financial statements that cannot be changed or should not be updated until the main numbers, the financial statement numbers, are updated. And then audit committee has time to review it, and then it gets adopted by the board. So between the time that we receive the pension numbers, the OPEB numbers is another one that we typically wait for. And then the review process is between us and management, building up that management discussion and analysis based on those final numbers. And then giving enough time to the audit committee to review it. I think December time to ensure that we have enough time to make sure that these financial statements are fairly set. There's no typos, there's nothing in there. December is a very good time to get those financial statements issued. Earlier can definitely be done, but it's management decision. Definitely, the December timeframe is a very good time frame to ensure the quality of the financial statement.
One question, which is really the number 4 item on the agenda, and maybe we just go there now. Is there anything in the narrative part of or presentation or the recasting of information in the 4 part of the report management section that would be meaningful or helpful? Some comments have been made earlier, prior years, that it really didn't tell the kind of story we wanted to tell. And whether or not there's certain narrative sections in terms of comments in the management section that we would want to add or redo.
So a lot of that is governed by the accounting standards. The section that you have flexibility to modify predominantly is what we call the introductory section. There's management discussion and analysis, but then again, that's regulated by the gas controls and the requirement for the tell the reader about significant in this. The introductory section is the major initiative section. It has a section in there called the major initiative section. And I think I can't say for the district, but for the typical local government, they use that section for transparency purposes. They talk about major projects that is upcoming, not just for upcoming year, but for many subsequent years after. It's kind of like a long-term plan, major reserves that they are planning on keeping in case, something catastrophic, fire districts, we just never know, something big may happen. And what they're doing in terms of mitigate those risks, basically, the business risks. Are there any sections? I know that you have many of those items in the introductory section. We tell our clients, I don't think that there's anything lacking in that introductory section. But again, the objective is transparency and major initiatives of a government. That's where typically I see many of these agencies putting that information in there. So I know we have about a month before we issue the financial statements. We can only look at last year. If it's something that you think that we should put in there in the introductory section, management, I'm pretty sure we're more than happy to have it.
Glorianne, what are your thoughts? Are there things that you think we ought to try and take a harder look at? I mean, that, that could be done early on.
There's nothing that jumps out at me that we should be taking a harder look at, but you're right. If we can do that earlier on, and we should do it early on to stay on schedule.
Yeah. In some that I've taken a look at, other districts, there's a fair amount of information sometimes on historical perspective, along with what anticipations for in the future.
Yes, so historical would probably, so the finished statements are basically 3 sections. One is the introductory section that we just talked about. Then there's the financial section, and then the statistical section. And to some extent, I want to say maybe 90% of the content for section 2 and 3, which is the financial and the statistical that has the historical data, these are governed by actual standards. So,
right.
So definitely it has it. And the reason that there's not much flexibility is the way that Gatsby thinks about it. They say, we want consistency and comparability. When someone looks at Moraga's CAFR, they can compare it with another fire district's CAFR, or they can compare it with even another government, city or a county. So that's the purpose of that consistency. And I know it's a little bit restrictive, but these are, I guess, why Gatsby justifies it, that we want people to know where to find specific particular information. We want that flexibility. We don't want to give too much flexibility in those particular sections. The section in which you have flexibility is that introductory section, not highly regulated. There are a few rules here and there as to what you should have in it. So from a historical perspective, the statistical section does have some interesting trends, financial trends, how your fund balance changed, how your expenses changed over the past 10 years, how your pension changed over the past 10 years, OPEB. So it has that historical data in there. The intro section is where that flexibility is available depending on your taxpayers and your constituents. What do they want to know? And definitely, it's a good CAFR, I gotta tell you. And it has all the elements in there. It does have a lot about major initiatives, but then again, I mean, your constituents more than I do. So it's something that we definitely can work with you on and making sure that it's tailored specifically, if not already, for your constituents.
Yeah, I would like maybe some recommendations from you, Ahmad, or your staff could be passed on where when we start working on it early, we can get that in there at least and reflect on whether or not we want to make some changes or tell a little different story, and what, our objectives and goals and ideas are for the future.
We'll be more than happy to assist.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ahmad. I think we already covered the third item, the reporting required under governmental accounting standards. I think you covered that in the questions. Steve, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I'm satisfied. Thank you. Answering all the questions. Thank you to staff also. Very informative.
Great.
And so we just have one attendee. I just want to make sure that we provide an opportunity for that person to speak on any of the items 3.1 to 3.4.
I think it's Lisa Franklin from HR.
I still wanted to provide the opportunity. We haven't received any written public comment.
Okay. All right. Chief, anything you have or questions or comments?
Not a question, just a comment, sir. This has been a topic of discussion before, and I think it's worth continuing to call the auditor's attention to it, and anyone who may be listening. Given our size and our lack of depth, we do have a lack of internal controls just based on the small number of people that touch our financial instruments due to our size, and that those people and their capacity are definitely stretched, if not stressed, by the increase in activity associated with the grants and strike teams specifically. And so one of the things that I think is critical about the audit, and that we ask the auditor to continue to do as they have in the past, is keep in mind that due to the limited number of internal controls, we are reliant upon the auditor to come in and turn over those rocks and look in the books, because it would be very challenging for us internally if we had a bad actor, not suggesting that we do, but if we did, it's very likely that bad actor would go unnoticed internally, which is why we do rely on the auditor to get in and take a hard look at our activities.
Great.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your time, and Ahmad, look forward to working with you again another year, and your staff, and appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Lorianne, appreciate what you're doing as well. It is difficult when you're split like that. And like, you know, you think in terms of all of the activities that are going on, it seems to multiply. Even though sometimes they're small, it still requires a lot of additional work. So thank you.
Sir, if I could just, because yesterday was such a great example. So yesterday, Glorianne, in her role as Administrative Services Director, attended a negotiation sessions in the morning. She worked on the budget in the midday in order to help get the packet out. And then she wrapped it up with dealing with IT issues with the outage of an uninterrupted power supply and monitor replacement in her role as our IT director.
Wow.
You push all that into one day, given that none of those are interrelated, other than the fact that they all land on her desk. And it does speak to the number of things we ask her and the other staff members to cover, and the challenges that can present, given that there is still just one person with an awful lot of streams of stuff coming at them.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was looking at the agenda for the next board meeting and the number of pages and the number of reports, I thought, holy Toledo, how do they get this all done? A lot of work. Thank you. Okay, I guess we're finished. Look forward to, we probably will need to schedule the follow-up meeting after the audit, but we can do that respectively when we have a clearer picture when we'll have the numbers done.
That's really good.
Thank you.
All right.